Thank you very much for including me in this process, but I thought it's the afternoon, and so you're going to be doing a little bit of work yourself. I've got Slido here because I actually think this is quite an interesting topic. Obviously, that's why I chose it, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well. So also got to trust that the Slido works. We had a practice and it did. Technology, I'm a social scientist, I never quite know. Now, I'm sure you've done acknowledgement to country, but I always like to pause and reflect and recognise the work of the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay our respects. And I think with energy transition, we're in a lot of deep conversations around Australia about what the energy transition means to traditional owners. And I think there's huge opportunity, and so do they. And so I think as researchers, it's really important to try and uplift and find those opportunities. And even today, long duration energy storage was really looking at remote and regional. It's one of the places where it has a role to play. And in the theme of acknowledgements, the work that I'm drawing on here, because it's really conceptual in some ways for me at this stage, but I really want to acknowledge Hugh and Faz and the broader NZ team, and also Peter Newman and Josh Byrne, because this sort of came, this idea of attributes. It's, as a social scientist, I'm really interested in the motivations for people to participate, to decarb, to not. What are the, and engineers will often say it's about the tech, and then others it's just about the costs, make it cheap and everyone will do it. But I actually think people are not quite so simple. Obviously, cost is important, and cost of living and all of these things, especially in the poly-crisis world that we're in right now. But I actually think there's a lot more. And so this is a little bit of an early sort of thinking of this, and hence why I wanted to get Slido to get your thoughts, because I don't believe the world is a one-size-fits-all. Even in this room, we've all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. And so years ago, a Saturday, Sunday, when my kids were away, I'd go down to Sydney and we'd work on this, and we had a host of Peters being the reviewers for us. But it actually came out of a workshop that I was running on carbon capture and storage. Early days in this room, it's probably not a topic of technology that people are interested in, but at that stage, CSIRO was thinking about should they invest in CCS as a technology. And I was at UQ, and we ran some workshops with a broad range of different people, and basically they said if Australia's going to continue to export coal or gas, we have a responsibility to clean it up. And yes, CSIRO, you should invest in that research. And then that really motivated me, because at the time Friends of the Earth was just in the process of putting out lots of misinformation, or their views on CCS being very negative. And I thought, how do you broker a debate around a technology before it gets shut down? And that's what's really motivated all of my research, because we all have different ideologies. And from the point of view back then, it's a long time ago, 2004, I was very concerned about climate, still am. But the challenge is looming, and my argument is we always need to think about what are the techs. They won't all work. How do you keep that sort of conversation going? And so when we were running workshops up in, what's the town that we were doing? Mackay, right? I had this theory with influencers, lay public, and then sort of education are the three sort of targets. This guy was the editor of the Mackay paper, so quite influential. And he basically said, Peter, we want to do the right thing. We're busy just trying to feed the kids, put food on the table, do our jobs. We trust CSIRO, can't you tell us what to do? And so that was the motivation. I went back and talked to the director of the flagship at the time. But what I did through that is that we all have different motivations about why we might choose to participate in decarbonisation, or any of the choices that we make. To do. We don't want to get involved, make the decisions, make it easy for us. And so there's this whole bandwidth of people, and carrots and sticks can help in that way. Governments can regulate. If you think about the changing in LED lights and all of those things, it didn't take long to move the dial on some of these, others took longer. And what I also think, which is really relevant to this group with precincts, is that, and what we're seeing in our net zero precincts, is that place and context is really important. Do you live in an urban environment? Do you live in a remote or regional? Where is it? And what's gone on in that region or that area before? I did a lot of focus groups at one time down in Victoria, down at Traralgon, where the NG was closing pre and post, because obviously carbon capture and storage was a tech that was a focus down there. And by chance, I had one woman that came to a focus group many years ago and then was back on another one using this market research probably 5 years later. And she just said, Peter, I'm so sick of hearing about what's going to change the world and then nothing ever really happens. So people are interested, but what's gone on before? When I did some work down in Collie many years ago, they were really fed up with the way that they'd been treated. They'd had the coal buyout, there'd been a water pipeline put through. And so this lack of consultation for them, including them, is important. So I think when we're thinking about retrofitting, and I'm sure you've already talked about this today, is that sort of how do you bring the community into those conversations? So I'm also sorry if I'm going to repeat things that have been discussed this morning. I apologise I couldn't be here. But also language is important. We were just talking about the meaning of sustainability, climate change, all of these different words that we use, people attach different meanings to them. And so therefore, when we're talking about creating change, we've got to make sure that people are on the same page with the language that we're using. And I'm not going to talk about, this, because I know Peter would have covered it and we all know what a precinct is. This is the definition that's on the net zero precinct pathway to net zero is with neighbourhood or district. And a typical precinct will contain private and public land with shared infrastructure. So many years I worked for Body Shop, skin and hair care in a previous life, both here and overseas. We were in many different retail precincts, on street shop fronts, Grafton Street in Dublin, but then in a sort of commercial shopping as well. Each of those had different challenges around how could we be the most sustainable within the way the Body Shop wanted to. So I guess we all know the precincts are many and varied, particularly when we're thinking about retrofits, because you've got an existing building stock of some sort. And when I think about some of my friends who brought into, say, I can remember when they were redoing a school in Victoria that they'd made into an urban living, what was their motivations for being involved? What was hard about it? When they set up, obviously it's not retrofitting, the eco village up in Queensland, what were the motivations for the developers and so forth? And so in our last milestone report, hopefully everyone can read those, there was we don't need to get hung up on the details because these will come back to you in a moment. But Baz was talking about his PhD and the work they're doing in this ETOS modelling and was espousing the virtues of the financial value of doing this. It was a great investment. But then the conversation went, but actually that's not always what people would be getting involved in this for. There are many other reasons why people might choose. And if I think back some of the early work I did in CSIRO when we were actually before the LRED of long solar, we did a whole lot of interviews with the early adopters. One person was putting solar on the roof because they were scared that there was going to be a war and they actually had a bunker out the back all filled up with food and so forth. That was their motivation, self-sustaining in a terrible world. This was 2006 or 7. So what I've done is plagiarised a few different pieces of information that I'm going to share, but what you need to do now is get out your phones and tap into Slido and NZP. And obviously I was doing this yesterday, so I tried with my daughter in Melbourne and she did manage to enter something and I think I've cleared it all. So is everyone getting something coming up? And people online, hopefully you can scan it from your screen as well and participate. Sorry, should be everyone. And then we'll work through the question. Have you got a question that's come up already by chance? Yeah, so I'm going to go. So is everyone happy if I move on? You're already on to your Slido first question? Yeah? Thinking? All right, I'll move on. We can always go back. So here, this is the difference. All right. So how did you travel to this event today? Core part of thinking about our motivations, precincts, when I've come back to some of the work that Hugh shared, transport is one of those easy wins in many ways. But we do need to make it easy. How can I scroll this down? This could be challenging. I want to get to the bottom of it.
That is the bottom.
That is, there we go. I just wanted to make sure I could get right down. Sorry, thanks. Okay. So most people here, which is not surprising, it's Perth, it's not easy, you travel by car. Okay, hang on. I've just got a tiny, having had an eye operation, this is quite challenging for an old girl. Sorry. Is that there? Yeah, okay. We'll go to the next one. You probably already got it. Imagine you are a developer of a precinct retrofit. Which of these attributes would be your top 3 motivations? It's not actually showing percentage. That's unfortunate. It did the other day. But yeah, I can put this in full screen either, can I? There's the bar. It's not in all of them. So 16 people have voted. 17. I'll have to find the percentages after. I'm sorry, that has dropped off. But so financial value, lower construction costs, higher sales price, emissions reduction in embodied or operational carbon, and increased co-benefits. Wellbeing, increased thermal comfort, ability to participate were the top ones. There's some that had reputational benefits, energy resilience, and ability to access green finance. So that's the developer in your interpretation, the developer's view of the world of retrofitting. Do we have any developers here? Online, maybe? Okay. This is why I think it's interesting to think about who's the person that's doing it. So now you're a tenant of a precinct retrofit. And then I was thinking, well, are you a retail tenant, commercial, or are you a housing tenant? So you can choose and choose accordingly. What would be your top 3? So I did change the financial value slightly, cheaper running costs and lower rents. We go into settings and find a way, but I don't want to mess it up. So you get so nervous about tech. Sorry. Should be able to, but unless someone's a Slido expert, I probably have to stop sharing. How many we've got? 18, 19. So financial values up there still. Increased co-benefits. Okay, actually quite similar to the developer. Okay. Now you're an owner within a precinct retrofit. Which of these attributes would be your top 3 motivations for participating?
When you say owner, you mean owner of the assets,
Yeah, so you might be, owner of
the building?
a building or a house within the precinct or an apartment, or sky's the limit. Hey, and this is where definition is important, right? You could spend a lot of time. Each of these will bring a different worldview to what will be important. Okay. So financial value, emissions reduction, increased co-benefits, reputational benefits, energy. So the next one is really just to then sit back and think, these were, you'll see now the whole 12, these are the 12, and I thought you can rank them from 1 to 12, 1 being the top, most important to 12. Oops, someone's trying to come on. Someone online may not be muted. I just thought it was interesting to look at the 12 that have ended up in our report at this stage. Maybe you need to think a little bit harder.
A bit difficult to rank like the whole 12.
You should start with the number 1 and then you'll start to see they'll just fall in. Yeah. No one's going to know that it's you. It's just. Harder on a telephone. Someone might be driving and you may need to mute your phone, whatever that is. We can hear you. Wrong. Oops, sorry, I want to go back. Sorry, don't. So it's interesting to look at what keeps my moves across, sorry. In that top position, financial value seems to be quite a winner here. Again, I guess it depends. So this is you, and we are a group that will be thinking about this a lot, engaged in it. If you took it to your mum or your dad or a teenager, how do you think they would respond to any of these as well? So this is really just a bit of an exercise. Obviously, there's a lot we could do with this information, and I am really interested as a social scientist to think about what we could do more with this once we know, and part of the NZP project, once we've started to think about what that looks like. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but I did just want to give you a chance that if there are other attributes that haven't come up that you think are missing, you can actually add words, and you can add one and then you can add another if you want to. So this will give us a nice little word cloud. So if there's a really burning attribute that's been overlooked, put it up. Leadership. Once you've done one, I tried it yesterday, just click it again and you can add another word. So you're not limited to just one word. Green infrastructure, safe, biodiversity, social impact. Anything else? Obviously, there's a lot you can do with word clouds as well as different themes come through and all of those sorts of things. So thank you for indulging me with this, but I just thought it's actually interesting to sit back and think about those motivations around what are the attributes that might motivate you in these individual roles. Obviously, you've got a lot more knowledge than others. And I also wanted to acknowledge a couple of references that Hugh shared with the group, and I was looking at these as I was preparing for this. What are the dimensions of sustainable building design? And you people would be well across these. As we think about, again, what's important? Are they all equal? How do we prioritise the dimensions? How do we make sure that they happen? Are they all equal? Or are they different in Perth than what they would be in Melbourne? I think it's really interesting. I'm happy to share any of these slides with you as well for the references and so forth. And then when I dug a bit deeper, and this is also, I think, in this report, there were some great references around some of the pros and cons of sustainable building, the dimensions of it. Obviously, there are direct benefits, as we know. You would all be aware of that. I don't need to read through them all. They're there, which I'm sure you've been discussing this morning, lots of these topics, but also beyond the individual broader community. But at the same time, there are cons as well. So although everyone wants to have financial value, right now, it's not always for selling as an owner, as a developer. It has been proven to attract higher revenues. Actually, that should be a pro, not a con. Geez, until I was late doing this. Yeah, buying it. Yeah, thank you. That's what I was thinking. Good, thank you. And then just this opportunity for market failures. And I think this is, this is probably where we're at right now in a lot of these issues. So there's so many different negative externalities when we think about transition and what needs to happen. And this idea, which developers versus owners, do we have different motivations, different to actually achieve this? And then on to another article that was shared by Hugh. See, I do read them, Hugh. I do find the time. I just thought this was really interesting because when you can access it or whatever, but co-benefits are central to the case for climate action, but are often sidelined in many economic analyses. This paper presents an evaluation of 3 dimensions of the cost and benefits of climate change interventions in 6 urban regions of the UK, so across different areas, different contexts. Findings indicate that meeting the UK's climate targets could yield 164 billion in total benefits, but actually 13% of these are only financial, 79% of which are social, and it goes on. And this is something that I've been talking about for a long time. How do you actually incorporate the social? How do you place a value on the social benefits of decarbonisation? And even when I was back at CSIRO many years ago, we talked about how could you actually do that and put it into the climate models? Is there a way of preferences? So I think there's a lot to unpick when we think about this. And this paper really, so when you actually go down into the detail, a lot of it was to do with transport, was where the quick wins, which is why I put that question at the front. And we've got lots of experts in transport, but there are other things that when we're thinking about the retrofit, we need to understand those motivations, but also how can you actually articulate them in a way that looks like it is adding financial value in some way as well? Because if we look at what people put first, so how do we talk about that? So I guess I think there are going to be desired outcomes. We need to find ways to articulate the trade-offs because everyone will have different roles and it won't always be lowest cost. And for some people, that's okay. Right now in cost of living crisis, probably not, but there are. And I think this thing of how do we better articulate the social environmental value of different attributes of decarbonised projects and how that fits also, because when we wrote the CSIRO Home Energy Saving Handbook, of course, we were doing the whole of Australia. And what you might recommend for Northern Territory and Far North Queensland is quite different from what you'd recommend for Tassie. And then throw in a change in climate and climate severe weather events And then there's also cultural things. When we had some African refugees living in a horrible all-electric, they used to heat their house by turning the oven on and leaving the door down, the most expensive way to ever heat their house. Like they weren't actually engaged in how to actually operate the house. Your lifestyle and also social norms. So what your friends and family think really matters, and it will influence. And so I think it's also something we could be using in a positive way to help move the dial where we need to. And I suppose that's what we're all trying to do as researchers. So that's it. Thank you.